turn our monitors now to the White House. The Trump administration continues to drastically change the U.S. immigration system during the first 100 days in office. Earlier this morning, the State Department released a memo canceling all refugee travel and processing. The president also issued a number of executive orders involving immigration over the last 3 days. Those orders include ending birthright citizenship, declaring a national emergency at the border, and designating cartels as terrorist organizations. Attorneys general in both the more than 20 states have filed lawsuits to stop Trump from ending birthright citizenship so far. CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe joins us now from the White House for more on all of this. Ed, thank you so much for being with us. Let's start with the refugee issue. How does this memo impact people waiting for refugee status? I mean, they're really in limbo, aren't they?
They are, Elizabeth. Essentially, anyone in the U.S. refugee admissions program who's trying to come in from overseas and may have been sponsored by a U.S. citizen now has got to sit tight or may never, at least in the next 4 years, get an opportunity to get in unless they can find some other way. This is among the different steps that now President Trump vowed he would take at the beginning of his presidency, so it should be no surprise to those who've been actively involved that the steps were taken. It is, of course, shocking, and there are undoubtedly people around the world who are calling either those American sponsors or their lawyers who may have been involved in the situation to try to figure out, is this immediate? Is it as of today? Do I have maybe 48 hours to get in? But it would appear it is immediate and that those changes are happening. And as you mentioned, a lot of the other immigration decisions that he announced or that he's put in through executive action are going to face legal challenges and may not ever be fully implemented until or before those legal challenges begin, in part because there aren't necessarily people in place yet to start implementing them, if that makes sense. So a lot of detail, a lot of sort of take a breath and really review the details of this, ask around if you're someone who's directly affected. But all of it designed to send the message that immigration policy in the United States, and for those trying to get into the United States, is changing dramatically and will be quite different than it was over the last 4 years.
Yeah, it was something that Trump promised repeatedly during his campaign for president. And I want to move to this issue real quick. CBS News obtained a memo from the Trump administration about the future of employees hired under the diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. Those employees scheduled to be placed on leave today. And just moments ago, Senator John Kennedy had this to say on this president's latest move.
I personally don't believe that race or gender should be used to either help a person or to harm a person. In the past 4 years under President Biden, it was the exact opposite. And I think what you're going to see under President Trump reacting to the feelings of the American people is to go back to a race-neutral, gender-neutral system based on merit.
So, Ed, do we know yet what happens to those employees once they're put on leave? Are they eventually going to be let go?
Well, first of all, Senator Kennedy is expressing one view, but there are obviously people who feel differently about that. We haven't heard yet, at least on camera, from other Democratic lawmakers who will be strongly opposed to this decision and who would argue the exact opposite of Kennedy, that, in fact, this is going to invite issues of gender and racial discrimination once again in the federal ranks. There have been examples of it through the years, and what President Biden had put in place was designed to start addressing those, though there were still examples when he was president, especially in the percentage of people hired across the government. It is still a predominantly male and white workforce, as it has been historically, and those memos and orders that were put in place by President Biden were designed to get into that and start changing the numbers, and there had been some modest improvement. As for those that are directly working on diversity, equity, inclusion programs, which are not just racial and gender-based, but also to some extent socioeconomic, for example, making sure that there are paid internships instead of just a non-paid internship where there might have been one before. What this memo is essentially saying is if you work at an agency where there are, and this is just hypothetical, say 7 people in the Washington office that oversee DEI-related programming or enforcement of policy, they're the ones that get put on leave and will eventually probably lose their job. But what is often the case with people who deal with this kind of a program or enforcement is that they're probably also dealing with other elements of personnel policy, right? So they're in the HR office and they may have other responsibilities. And so maybe they're just going to be told as they're on paid leave, okay, turns out actually about 60% of your job has nothing to do with DEI. You can do that 60%, you're no longer doing the 40%. And we'll find other things for you to do, or just go back to focusing on that 60%. There's no black or white, one-size-fit-all solution to implementing what the president is doing, because each agency or department would have done this differently depending on the size and scope of the workforce and the kind of work that they do. Not everyone sits at a computer punching away at numbers and data all day. You know, they're park rangers,
right.
they're air traffic controllers, they're people that deal with rare minerals or with tariff policy. And so what he's saying is put these people on paid leave. Once our team is in place, they're going to sort out what exactly to do with them and whether or not they still have a job or can go back to doing other functions. And that'll get sorted out now probably over the next several months. But it does mean that a handful of people who work for the federal government and agencies all across the country, 85% of federal employees are outside the Washington area, are going to be told today, you're on paid leave, your email's turned off, and we'll get back to you in a few weeks or a few months.
I want to switch now, Ed, to foreign policy. The president took to Truth Social earlier today saying he would enforce sanctions on Russia if President Vladimir Putin fails to reach a deal with Ukraine. Are we getting kind of a clearer idea of foreign policy and the future of aid to Ukraine under this new Trump administration?
Well, yeah, and look, what he's saying here is... I was trying to read that while I was on the screen there. Stop this ridiculous war. It's only going to get worse if we don't make a deal, and soon I have no other choice but to put high levels of taxes, tariffs, and sanctions on anything being sold by Russia to the United States and various other participating countries. There are, of course, big sanctions already in place, especially on its oil industry and on key oligarchs and other leaders in Russian society. So, in essence, what he's saying is he'd continue enforcing what's already in place, done pretty aggressively by folks over at the Treasury Department next door to the White House. And what he's suggesting here is if they don't try to move to end this war soon, he might try to come up with more. There are options for more, sure. They would have been drafted during the Biden years and in concert with European allies, and if necessary, it looks like he's saying here he would consider enforcing them. But what he has also said in recent days, Elizabeth, is I want to seek peace. I want to see these two sides talk to each other. He's open to negotiations. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has also signaled that. And so we'll just have to give it a few days, if not weeks, to see where exactly things settle on this and who eventually starts talking to them in more detail about trying to reach some kind of peaceful resolution.
Ed, before you go, I want to talk about a moment that happened yesterday that's pretty striking that House Republicans are zeroing in on. This was Reverend Marianne Buddy's sermon during the National Cathedral prayer service yesterday, asking the president to have mercy for the people who are, quote, feeling scared right now, referring to the LGBTQ plus community as well as undocumented immigrants. Just moments ago, Republican Conference Chair Lisa McClain had this to say during a press conference. Let's take a listen to that.
Yesterday, at the National Prayer Service, the bishop was extreme in her views, extremely out of line and out of touch. And what she did was uncalled for. Perhaps we should pray for her.
Now, Ed, we've heard from both the president and the bishop here. We know we've heard the president. He's demanding an apology from the bishop. Have we heard from her herself?
She spoke just a little while ago on The View on ABC. We should take a listen to what she had to say.
My responsibility that morning, yesterday morning, was to reflect, to pray with the nation for unity. And as I was pondering what are the foundations of unity, I wanted to emphasize respecting the honor and dignity of every human being, basic honesty and humility. And then I also realized that that unity requires a certain degree of mercy and compassion and understanding.
So that's her answer. Look, she was on Face the Nation with me last Easter Sunday, Elizabeth, and talked about her concerns that Christianity is being co-opted or distorted, as she put it, by politicians to their political benefit. So this is something that she's been pretty consistent in expressing. She's one of the leaders of the Episcopal Church here in Washington. She is the one that oversees the National Cathedral here in Washington, which is an Episcopal place of worship. and was also someone you may recall back when the president walked across Lafayette Park over to St. John's Church and held up a Bible after protesters were cleared, who expressed real outrage at what he did there by doing that. Again, concerned that he was co-opting or distorting Christianity to his benefit and religion. So she had sent signals she was going to say this. The president should have been aware that that was a possibility given their rhetorical history. You know, he said yesterday that he didn't think it was a very interesting service and they should have done better. And overnight he asked for an apology. We'll see if one comes. Notably, she did suggest that leaders in public life should consider a little more humility. And it was at that point that he sort of visibly scoffed during the sermon, clearly not expressing any since he heard it, at least regarding this specific issue. Elizabeth.
Ed O'Keefe, live from the White House. Thank you so much for that.